Every morning, I left generous tips for the elderly waiter at the cafe near our office. Harold had worked at Murphy's Corner Cafe for decades, always greeting customers with genuine warmth despite his worn hands and tired shoulders. On this particular Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle, I reached for my purse to leave my usual $5 tip when Harold suddenly grabbed my wrist. His weathered fingers trembled as his voice dropped to an urgent whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Don't go in today, sweetheart. Trust me." I stared into his worried blue eyes, seeing genuine fear that made my stomach clench. Something about his desperation made me cancel my morning meetings immediately and drive home instead. 2 hours later, I watched through my apartment window as federal agents escorted my business partner and former best friend, Jessica Sterling, into my own office building wearing handcuffs. I called in sick that Tuesday morning, my hands shaking as I dialed our office number. My assistant, Jennifer, sounded confused when I told her to reschedule everything. "Adelaide, are you sure? Jessica was asking for you earlier, and she seemed really anxious about something." That pit in my stomach grew deeper. From my apartment in Capitol Hill, I started making phone calls. First, I contacted our company attorney, Timothy Walsh, but his secretary said he was unavailable and would call me back. Then I tried reaching our lead investor, Martin Crawford, but his assistant gave me the same runaround. Everyone was suddenly too busy to talk to me, which felt completely wrong. I spent the next few hours researching what federal agents might want with TechVault Innovations, the artificial intelligence startup Jessica and I had built together over the past 18 months. We were just 8 months away from our initial public offering, something we had been working toward since we met at that tech conference in San Francisco 2 years ago. Jessica had convinced me to leave my secure position at Microsoft, promising we would revolutionize how companies use artificial intelligence for data optimization. I had developed breakthrough algorithms during my graduate work at Stanford 3 years earlier, and Jessica believed we could turn those innovations into a billion-dollar company. I remembered how excited we had been when Martin Crawford's venture capital firm invested $2 million in our startup. Jessica had been so charming during those early pitch meetings, explaining our technology with passion and precision. She understood the market potential of my algorithms better than anyone I had ever met. But now, staring at news footage of Jessica being led away in handcuffs, I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. I opened my laptop and began checking patent databases, something I probably should have done more regularly as a business owner. What I discovered made my blood run cold. 3 of my most valuable patents, including my breakthrough artificial intelligence optimization algorithm, had been secretly transferred to a shell company called Sterling Holdings LLC. The transfer had happened 6 weeks earlier, right after we received preliminary approval for our public offering from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I stared at the computer screen, reading and rereading the patent transfer documents. My name had been completely removed from inventions I had spent years developing. Every algorithm, every innovation, every breakthrough that formed the foundation of our company had somehow become property of Jessica's shell company. The timestamp on the documents showed the transfers had occurred at 2:37 in the morning on a Thursday, when Jessica claimed she was visiting her sister in Portland. I remembered that week clearly because I had been working late every night, preparing investor presentations for our upcoming roadshow. I scrolled through more documents, discovering that Jessica had been planning this betrayal for months. She had filed paperwork establishing Sterling Holdings LLC 4 months earlier, shortly after Martin Crawford increased his investment in our company from $2 million to $5 million. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check the news. Channel 7. I grabbed my remote and switched to the local station. The reporter was standing outside our office building. "Federal investigators have arrested Jessica Sterling, co-founder of TechVault Innovations, on charges of patent theft and securities fraud. Sources close to the investigation suggest that Sterling allegedly stole artificial intelligence technology developed by her business partner and attempted to use those stolen patents as the foundation for a fraudulent public stock offering scheduled for next Monday. Next Monday. That was only 6 days away. I had no idea our IPO date had been moved up so dramatically. Jessica had told me we were still weeks away from finalizing everything. I felt nauseous as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Jessica had not only stolen my patents, but she had also been lying to me about our IPO timeline. While I thought we were still preparing for a future public offering, she was apparently days away from taking my life's work public under her own name. The next morning, I drove back to Murphy's Corner Cafe, needing to understand how Harold had known to warn me. He was wiping down tables when I walked in, and his face showed genuine relief when he saw me. "Thank goodness you listened to me, Adelaide," he said, guiding me to a corner booth away from other customers. "I was terrified you would walk into that building yesterday morning." Harold sat across from me, his kind eyes filled with concern. "I need to tell you something about my background. I worked at the United States Patent Office for 35 years before I retired and started working here. Yesterday morning, I recognized one of those men in expensive suits who had been meeting with your partner, Martin Crawford." My heart sank. Martin Crawford was our primary investor, the venture capitalist who had made our company possible. "You know Martin Crawford." Harold nodded grimly. 20 years ago, Crawford destroyed my son's biotech startup through patent theft. My boy had developed breakthrough cancer treatment protocols, and Crawford convinced him to sign partnership agreements that transferred all intellectual property rights to Crawford's shell companies. When my son realized what had happened and tried to fight back, Crawford used his legal resources to crush him completely. Harold's voice broke slightly. My son took his own life rather than face bankruptcy and professional destruction. I've been watching Crawford ever since, hoping someday I could help someone fight back successfully. The weight of Harold's loss hit me like a physical blow. "Harold, I'm so sorry about your son." He reached across the table and patted my hand. "Don't apologize, sweetheart. Use this information to protect yourself. Crawford isn't just a venture capitalist. Has been running sophisticated intellectual property theft schemes for decades." I spent the rest of that morning in Harold's living room above the cafe, going through boxes of documents he had been collecting about Crawford's business dealings. Harold had newspaper clippings, court filings, and business records spanning 2 decades. Crawford targets startups founded by young entrepreneurs who don't have extensive legal knowledge or professional networks, Harold explained. He identifies companies with valuable patents, invests enough money to gain influence, then systematically isolates the original inventors from their own intellectual property. As Harold showed me pattern after pattern of Crawford's fraud, I began accessing our company's shared digital accounts from my laptop. What I discovered made Jessica's betrayal even more devastating. Through phone records and email accounts I could access via our business partnership agreement, I uncovered a conspiracy that went far beyond Jessica and Crawford. Dr. Amanda Fielding, my former Stanford advisor who had helped me develop the original algorithms, had been feeding information about my research to Martin Crawford for over 2 years. I found email exchanges between Dr. Fielding and Crawford discussing my work months before Jessica and I had even met. They had been planning to steal my patents since my graduate school days, and Jessica had been recruited specifically to get close to me and gain access to my intellectual property. The emails revealed that Crawford had identified me as a target during my final year at Stanford. Dr. Fielding had provided him with detailed reports about my research progress, my personality, and my career plans. They knew I was ambitious but inexperienced in business, making me an ideal victim for their scheme. But the most devastating discovery came when I found romantic text messages between Jessica and Martin Crawford. They had been intimately involved for 8 months. Their entire business relationship with me had been built on lies and manipulation. While Jessica was pretending to be my friend and business partner, she was actually reporting every detail of my work and my plans to Crawford. I read message after message describing their upcoming celebration vacation in the Bahamas, paid for with profits from what Crawford called the Adelaide Project. They discussed my personality traits like I was a laboratory specimen, noting how my trust and dedication made me easy to manipulate. Jessica had written to Crawford, "Adelaide works 16-hour days and never questions anything I tell her about the business side. She's so focused on the technology that she doesn't realize I've been setting up the patent transfers for months. She actually thanked me yesterday for handling all the legal paperwork so she could concentrate on algorithm development." Crawford had responded, "Perfect. Make sure she stays isolated from our legal team and investor meetings. The IPO will be finalized before she understands what happened." I stared at those messages until my vision blurred with tears. Every memory of my friendship with Jessica became poisoned by this new knowledge. Every late night we had spent working together, every celebration dinner, every moment I had trusted her with my dreams and fears had been a performance designed to rob me of everything I had created. The next morning, I attempted to call Timothy Walsh, our business attorney, to discuss legal options for recovering my patents. His secretary's response chilled me to the bone. Mr. Walsh has been instructed not to communicate directly with you regarding Tech Vault matters, Miss Morrison. Your business partner, Miss Sterling, has informed us that you're experiencing significant mental health challenges and shouldn't be involved in legal decision-making at this time. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Excuse me? I'm the co-founder of this company, and I'm perfectly capable of making legal decisions. I'm sorry, but we have documentation from Miss Sterling indicating that you've been exhibiting erratic behavior and making threats against business partners. Mr. Walsh believes it would be inappropriate to discuss confidential legal matters with you until you receive professional help. After hanging up, I immediately called our business bank to check our accounts. The customer service representative informed me that my access to company accounts had been suspended pending internal investigation of financial irregularities. When I tried to use my keycard to enter our office building, the security system rejected it. The building manager, someone I had known for over a year, looked uncomfortable when I approached his desk. Adelaide, I'm sorry, but I received paperwork yesterday instructing me to deactivate your building access. There's apparently some kind of legal dispute involving your company. I felt completely cut off from my own life's work. Jessica had systematically isolated me from every aspect of the business we had supposedly built together. That afternoon, my phone rang. My sister Claire was calling from Portland, her voice filled with worry. Adelaide, I just got the strangest call from your business partner, Jessica. She said you've been having some kind of breakdown and that you've been making threatening statements about investors and business partners. She wanted to know if our family has any history of mental illness. My hands started shaking. Claire, Jessica is lying. She's been stealing my patents and planning to defraud investors. I'm not having a breakdown. Adelaide, sweetie, I believe you. But Jessica sounded really convincing. She said you've been working 20-hour days and not eating properly. She mentioned that you've been talking about people conspiring against you. The manipulation was so sophisticated that even my own sister was beginning to doubt my sanity. Jessica had spent months creating a narrative that would discredit anything I might say about her fraud. I drove back to Harold's cafe, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. He took one look at my face and immediately locked the front door, flipping the sign to closed. Tell me what happened, sweetheart. When I finished explaining how Jessica had poisoned my professional and personal relationships, Harold's jaw was clenched with anger. This is exactly what Crawford did to my son. Isolation and character assassination. They make you question your own reality until you don't know what's true anymore. Harold disappeared into his apartment and returned with a manila folder thick with documents. I've been investigating Crawford for 20 years. These papers show that he's used this exact playbook against 17 different entrepreneurs. The pattern is always the same. Identify talented inventors, infiltrate their lives through romantic partners or business associates, steal their intellectual property, then destroy their credibility so they can't fight back. He opened the folder and showed me court documents from a case in Austin, Texas. Crawford destroyed a young biotech researcher named David Chen 3 years ago. David tried to expose Crawford's theft, but Crawford's team had already convinced David's investors, family, and colleagues that David was suffering from paranoid delusions. Harold pulled out another file. 2 years ago in Denver, Crawford targeted a renewable energy startup founded by Sarah Kim. Same pattern: romantic infiltration, patent theft, character assassination. Sarah ended up in bankruptcy court, while Crawford made $40 million licensing her solar panel innovations. As Harold showed me case after case, I realized that Jessica and I were just the latest victims in a decades-long pattern of systematic fraud. But unlike Crawford's previous victims, I had Harold as an ally who understood exactly what was happening. Harold, how do we fight back? He smiled for the first time since I had arrived. My granddaughter Emma Walsh specializes in intellectual property law. She's been helping me build cases against Crawford for years, waiting for the right opportunity to take him down. I think that opportunity just arrived. Harold handed me Emma's business card. Call her tonight. Tell her Harold's granddaughter sent you, and tell her it's time to use everything we've collected against Martin Crawford. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Harold had spent 20 years preparing for this fight, and now I had access to 2 decades of evidence about Crawford's criminal enterprise. But as I drove home that evening, I discovered that Jessica's manipulation had reached even deeper into my life. My apartment building manager was waiting in the lobby with an eviction notice. Adelaide, I'm really sorry about this, but your co-signer reported lease violations related to using the apartment for illegal business activities. According to the documentation I received, you've been running some kind of fraud operation from your unit. Jessica had co-signed my lease when I moved to Seattle. Now she was using that connection to make me homeless. Standing in my apartment that night, surrounded by patent documents and legal papers, I realized that Jessica and Crawford hadn't just stolen my intellectual property. They had systematically dismantled every aspect of my life, leaving me with no professional relationships, no legal representation, no business access, and soon, no place to live. But Harold's manila folder sat on my kitchen table like a beacon of hope. For 20 years, he had been waiting for the chance to get justice for his son. Now, perhaps together, we could finally bring down Martin Crawford's criminal empire. I met Emma Walsh the next morning at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, far from downtown where Crawford's associates might spot us. Emma looked exactly like Harold had described, sharp, determined, and carrying a briefcase that suggested serious business. She was Harold's granddaughter, but she had inherited his passion for justice, along with his methodical approach to building cases. At 32, Emma had spent 8 years specializing in intellectual property theft cases, and she had been investigating Martin Crawford independently since graduating from law school. Adelaide, my grandfather has told me about your situation, and I've been waiting for someone with your technical background and documentation to come forward, Emma said, pulling out a thick legal folder. Crawford's operation is sophisticated, but it has legal vulnerabilities we can exploit. Emma spread documents across our table, showing me court filings, patent records, and financial transactions spanning 2 decades. Crawford makes 3 critical mistakes in every scheme. First, he transfers patents too quickly, creating suspicious timing patterns. Second, he uses the same shell company structures repeatedly. And third, he always leaves digital evidence of coordination between conspirators. She pointed to a timeline chart showing Crawford's business activities. Your case fits his pattern perfectly, but you have something previous victims didn't have. Technical expertise to prove the algorithms are yours, financial documentation showing the suspicious timing of patent transfers, and my grandfather's 20 years of research connecting your case to Crawford's criminal history. Emma explained our legal strategy. We would file emergency injunctions in 3 different jurisdictions to halt the IPO, submit comprehensive evidence packages to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and coordinate with federal prosecutors already investigating Crawford's venture capital firm. Adelaide, I need to warn you that Crawford will fight back aggressively. He has expensive lawyers and political connections, but federal authorities have been building a case against him for years. Your situation might provide the evidence they need to finally prosecute him under the RICO Act. Over the next few hours, Emma outlined exactly how we would reclaim my patents and expose Crawford's entire operation. She had contacts at the FBI's white-collar crime unit who were already investigating similar complaints about Crawford's business practices. The key is timing, Emma explained. Crawford expects victims to be isolated and confused. He doesn't expect someone with your technical skills working with someone with my legal background and my grandfather's investigative research. Emma introduced me to Rachel Torres, an investigative journalist at the Seattle Times who had been tracking Crawford's business dealings for over a year. Rachel had been waiting for victims willing to go on record about Crawford's fraudulent activities. Adelaide, I've documented similar schemes involving Crawford, but I've never had someone with your level of technical expertise and clear documentation, Rachel said. If you're willing to tell your story publicly, I can publish an exposé that will expose Crawford's entire operation. We spent the afternoon developing a coordinated plan. Emma would handle the legal aspects, filing federal charges and working with prosecutors. Rachel would publish her investigative report, providing public pressure to support our legal case. I would work with federal investigators, providing technical evidence about my algorithms and Crawford's theft. But first, we needed to secure evidence before Crawford could destroy it. Emma had learned that TechVault's offices would be empty that evening due to the federal investigation, giving us an opportunity to download company files before Crawford's team could delete everything. Adelaide, you still have administrative access to company servers, right? I nodded. Jessica had been so focused on isolating me from legal and financial matters that she had overlooked my technical access to our computer systems. Perfect. Tonight, download every email, every financial record, and every technical document from TechVault's servers. Once we have that evidence secured, Crawford won't be able to destroy the proof of his fraud. That evening, Emma and I entered TechVault's office building using my administrative keycard. The building was eerily quiet, with federal evidence tape still marking Jessica's office door. I logged into our main server system and began downloading terabytes of data. Email archives, financial records, patent applications, investor communications, and technical documentation spanning our entire partnership. As files transferred to encrypted external drives, I discovered email exchanges I had never seen before. Crawford's team had been using hidden email accounts to coordinate their scheme, but those accounts were linked to our company's email server for administrative purposes. Reading through Crawford's private communications was like discovering the blueprints for my own destruction. He had detailed profiles of my personality, my work habits, and my relationships. He knew exactly how to manipulate me through Jessica, and he had planned every aspect of their fraud months in advance. But most importantly, I found evidence that Crawford was planning to betray Jessica immediately after the IPO. He had already prepared documentation to blame Jessica for the patent theft, making her a scapegoat while he disappeared with the profits. Crawford had written to his attorney. Once the offering closes, release evidence suggesting that Sterling acted independently to steal Morrison's patents. Position ourselves as innocent investors who were also victimized by Sterling's fraud. Morrison will be discredited. Sterling will face federal charges and retain control of the patents through our shell companies. Jessica had no idea that Crawford was planning to destroy her just as thoroughly as he was destroying me. She thought she was his partner, but she was actually just another victim in his scheme. By midnight, Emma and I had downloaded every piece of evidence from TechVault's servers. We now had documentation proving that Crawford had systematically defrauded investors, stolen patents, and planned to manipulate stock markets through fraudulent public offerings. Adelaide, we have everything we need to destroy Crawford's entire operation, Emma said as we locked up the office building. Tomorrow morning, we start fighting back. For the first time in a week, I felt truly hopeful. Crawford thought he had isolated me and stolen everything I had created. But now I had allies who understood his criminal methods, evidence that proved his fraud, and legal resources to fight back effectively. Crawford had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated my ability to recognize fraud and my determination to fight for justice. Tomorrow, his 20-year criminal enterprise would finally face real consequences. Emma's investigation uncovered something far more disturbing than I had imagined. Crawford's operation wasn't just targeting random entrepreneurs. It was part of a sophisticated international scheme that had been operating for over 5 years. Through Rachel Torres' investigative network, we discovered that Dr. Amanda Fielding had been running an intellectual property theft ring at Stanford University, specifically targeting international graduate students whose patents would be harder to defend legally due to their immigration status and limited resources. Adelaide, you weren't Crawford's first victim at Stanford, Emma explained during our morning meeting at her law firm. Fielding has been identifying promising graduate students, stealing their research, and feeding that information to Crawford's network for years. Emma showed me federal investigation documents revealing that 12 other graduate students from Stanford had been victimized through similar schemes. Most were from countries like China, India, and South Korea students whose families couldn't afford expensive American legal representation and who feared deportation if they challenged powerful business leaders. The pattern is always the same, Rachel Torres added, joining our meeting with a thick folder of research. Fielding identifies students with breakthrough technology. Crawford's team infiltrates their lives through romantic partners or business associates. They steal the intellectual property, then they use the students' immigration fears to prevent them from fighting back. But Crawford's scheme was even more systematic than we had realized. Through Emma's contacts at the FBI, we learned that Crawford's venture capital firm was specifically targeting companies with foreign-born founders or researchers, knowing these entrepreneurs would have fewer legal resources and professional connections to fight back effectively. Crawford has stolen intellectual property worth over $40 million from international students and immigrant entrepreneurs, Emma said grimly. Your case is part of a pattern that federal investigators have been tracking for 3 years. As we reviewed more documents, I realized that my American citizenship and technical background made me an unusual victim for Crawford's operation. Most of his previous targets had been isolated by their immigration status or language barriers. Crawford had assumed that my inexperience in business would make me as vulnerable as his other victims. Harold joined us that afternoon, bringing additional evidence he had collected about Crawford's network. Adelaide, my son wasn't Crawford's only victim, but he was one of the first American citizens Crawford targeted. Most of his victims since then have been international students who were too afraid of deportation to fight back legally. Harold's research revealed that Crawford had refined his methods over the years, focusing increasingly on victims who would be unlikely to access American legal systems. But targeting me had been a miscalculation. I had American citizenship, strong technical credentials, and now access to Emma's legal expertise and Harold's investigative research. Crawford made a critical error by going after you, Emma said. Federal prosecutors have been waiting for a victim with your profile. American citizen, clear documentation of theft, and willingness to testify publicly. Your case gives them jurisdiction to investigate Crawford's entire international operation. That afternoon, Emma received a call from FBI Special Agent David Rodriguez, who had been investigating Crawford's network as part of a larger federal task force focused on international intellectual property theft. Agent Rodriguez wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, Emma told me. Federal investigators have been building a RICO case against Crawford's organization, and they believe your evidence could provide the foundation for prosecuting his entire network. The RICO Act allows federal prosecutors to charge criminal organizations that engage in patterns of illegal activity. If Crawford's operation qualified under RICO, federal authorities could seize all assets connected to his criminal enterprise and prosecute everyone involved in the conspiracy. But Emma warned me that federal prosecution would be a lengthy process, and Crawford would use every resource available to fight back. Adelaide, Crawford has political connections and expensive lawyers. Federal authorities believe they can win, but this fight will require everything we've collected over the past 20 years. That evening, Rachel Torres called with shocking news about Jessica. Adelaide, I've been investigating Jessica's background, and I think she might be another victim rather than a willing participant in Crawford's scheme. Rachel had discovered that Jessica's previous business partner in Portland had been bankrupted through suspicious patent disputes just 6 months before Jessica moved to Seattle and met me. Jessica's first startup had been destroyed by investors who used the same legal tactics Crawford was now using against me. Jessica's pattern looks like someone who was targeted and recruited rather than someone who initiated fraud, Rachel explained. Crawford's team might have manipulated Jessica just as systematically as they manipulated you, then used her desperation to make her complicit in stealing your patents. This revelation changed everything about how I understood Jessica's betrayal. If Rachel was correct, Jessica wasn't Crawford's criminal partner. She was another victim who had been manipulated into destroying her friend rather than facing financial ruin herself. Emma agreed with Rachel's assessment. Crawford's operation relies on turning victims against each other. They isolate people, destroy their support networks, then offer them a choice: cooperate with fraud or face complete destruction. I realized that Jessica's romantic relationship with Crawford might have been another form of manipulation rather than a genuine partnership. Crawford was skilled at using personal relationships to control his victims, And Jessica might have been as deceived about their relationship as I had been about our business partnership. Adelaide, if Jessica was manipulated rather than criminal, she might be willing to cooperate with federal investigators, Emma suggested. Her testimony could provide crucial evidence about Crawford's methods and help us identify other victims in his network. The possibility that Jessica was another victim rather than my betrayer completely changed how I felt about our situation. Instead of being angry at Jessica's greed, I began to understand that both of us had been systematically deceived by someone much more sophisticated and dangerous than we had realized. Tomorrow's meeting with federal investigators would determine whether we could build a case strong enough to bring down Crawford's entire operation and provide justice for all his victims over the past 20 years. Harold's 20-year quest for justice for his son was finally approaching its conclusion, and my stolen patents might be the key to exposing one of the most sophisticated intellectual property theft schemes in federal law enforcement history. Friday morning arrived with the weight of everything we had discovered. Emma, Harold, and I met with FBI Special Agent David Rodriguez at the federal building in downtown Seattle. Agent Rodriguez was exactly what I expected from federal law enforcement: methodical, serious, and carrying evidence files that suggested extensive preparation. Miss Morrison, we've been investigating Martin Crawford's organization for 3 years, Agent Rodriguez began. Your case provides us with the evidence we need to execute coordinated federal charges under the RICO Act. Agent Rodriguez explained that federal investigators had been building cases against Crawford's network across multiple states, but they needed victims willing to testify publicly and evidence showing clear patterns of criminal conspiracy. My technical documentation and Emma's legal research had provided exactly what prosecutors needed. We've coordinated with the Securities and Exchange Commission to halt the IPO scheduled for Monday morning, Agent Rodriguez continued. At the same time, we'll be executing search warrants on Crawford's offices, his associates' homes, and all financial accounts connected to his shell companies. But first, Agent Rodriguez wanted me to help them with one final evidence-gathering operation. Miss Morrison, we'd like you to arrange a meeting with Jessica Sterling. We believe she's been manipulated rather than criminal, and her cooperation could help us identify other victims and gather additional evidence about Crawford's methods. Emma had arranged for Jessica to be released on bail pending her cooperation with federal investigators. Jessica had agreed to meet with me that afternoon, ostensibly to discuss terms for resolving our business disputes outside of court. What Jessica didn't know was that federal agents would be monitoring our conversation, and that I would be wearing recording equipment to document anything she revealed about Crawford's operation. I felt nervous as I drove to Tech Vault's office building for our meeting. This was the first time I would see Jessica since discovering the full scope of her betrayal, and I wasn't sure how I would react to seeing her in person. Jessica was waiting in our old conference room when I arrived. She looked exhausted and frightened, completely different from the confident business partner I remembered. Her eyes were red from crying, and she seemed to have lost weight since her arrest. Adelaide, thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Jessica said quietly. I know you must hate me for everything that's happened. I sat across from her at the conference table where we had spent so many hours planning our company's future. Jessica, I need to understand how this happened. I trusted you with everything. Jessica broke down completely. Adelaide, I never wanted any of this to happen. Crawford told me that you were planning to steal my contributions to the company, and that the only way to protect myself was to secure the patents under my control temporarily. As Jessica talked, I realized that Rachel Torres had been correct. Jessica had been manipulated just as systematically as I had been, but Crawford had convinced her that I was the threat she needed to protect herself against. Crawford showed me forged emails suggesting that you were planning to remove me from the company before the IPO. Jessica continued. He said you were telling investors that I hadn't contributed anything valuable to our technology development. Crawford had used the same isolation and character assassination tactics on both of us, but he had turned us against each other instead of helping us recognize that we were both being victimized. Jessica, those emails Crawford showed you were fake. I never said anything negative about your contributions to investors. Jessica's face showed genuine shock. Adelaide, are you telling me that Crawford lied about what you were planning? I pulled out my laptop and showed Jessica the real email exchanges I had discovered on our company servers. Jessica, Crawford has been planning to betray both of us from the beginning. Look at these messages he sent to his attorney. When Jessica read Crawford's plan to blame her for the patent theft and leave her facing federal charges alone, she became visibly angry for the first time since I had arrived. "That bastard told me we were partners," Jessica said, her voice shaking with rage. "He made me think that you were the problem and that he was protecting me from being cheated out of my share of the company." I showed Jessica more evidence of Crawford's manipulation, including documentation of how he had systematically lied to both of us about investor meetings, IPO timelines, and legal requirements. "Jessica, Crawford has been using these same tactics to steal intellectual property from entrepreneurs for over 20 years. We're not his first victims, and we won't be his last unless we work together to stop him." Jessica stared at the evidence I had collected, and I could see her understanding the full scope of Crawford's manipulation. "Adelaide, I am so sorry. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was just helping him steal everything from both of us." What happened next shocked both of us. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text message from Crawford. "Don't say anything to Adelaide about our Cayman Islands accounts. Federal agents are probably monitoring your conversation." Jessica showed me the message with trembling hands. "Adelaide, Crawford is monitoring our meeting somehow. He thinks federal agents are listening to us." I realized that Crawford was correct. Federal agents were monitoring our conversation, but his warning message to Jessica had just provided additional evidence of his criminal conspiracy. Within minutes, Emma called my cell phone. "Adelaide, federal agents just arrested Crawford at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. He was attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with 2 suitcases full of cash and financial documents." Jessica and I stared at each other in amazement. Crawford had been so confident in his ability to manipulate us that he hadn't realized we were working with federal investigators to gather evidence against him. "Jessica, would you be willing to cooperate with federal prosecutors to help them build cases against Crawford's entire network?" I asked. Jessica nodded immediately. "Adelaide, I want to help fix the damage I've caused. If Crawford has been doing this to other people for 20 years, we need to make sure he can never hurt anyone again." Agent Rodriguez entered our conference room 20 minutes later with news that coordinated federal raids had seized Crawford's offices, financial records, and computer systems simultaneously across 3 states. "Ladies, we've recovered evidence suggesting that Crawford's operation has stolen intellectual property from 47 different victims over the past 15 years, Agent Rodriguez announced. "Your cooperation has helped us build the strongest RICO case against intellectual property theft that federal prosecutors have ever filed." I looked at Jessica across our conference table, realizing that Crawford's greatest weakness had been his assumption that he could keep his victims fighting each other instead of recognizing their common enemy. Crawford was wrong. Jessica and I weren't enemies. We were allies who had been temporarily deceived by someone much more sophisticated and dangerous than either of us had initially understood. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where Jessica and I had reconciled our friendship and committed to working together to bring down Crawford's criminal empire. But now the room had a completely different atmosphere. It was filled with hope, success, and the satisfaction of justice finally served. Crawford had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for racketeering, securities fraud, and intellectual property theft. The federal investigation had uncovered 47 victims across 8 states, with stolen intellectual property valued at over $60 million. Dr. Amanda Fielding had been removed from Stanford University and faced her own federal charges for her role in targeting international graduate students. Jessica and I had rebuilt TechVault Innovations as an ethical company focused on fair intellectual property practices and supporting other entrepreneurs who had been victimized by fraudulent business schemes. Jessica received a reduced sentence of 6 months community service in exchange for her full cooperation with federal investigators, and she had worked tirelessly to help identify other victims in Crawford's network. Most importantly, my patents had been restored to my legal ownership, and I had licensed them to companies that provided fair compensation and properly credited my work. The technology I had developed during graduate school at Stanford was now being used in medical research applications and environmental protection systems, exactly the kind of meaningful work I had always hoped my innovations would support. Harold had finally received the justice he had sought for his son's memory. Federal prosecutors used Harold's 20 years of investigative research as foundational evidence for their RICO case against Crawford's entire organization. At 73 years old, Harold had lived to see his son's death avenged through the destruction of the criminal network that had destroyed so many lives. Emma Walsh had become my regular legal counsel and close friend. Her expertise in intellectual property law had been crucial not just in recovering my patents, but in helping other Crawford victims reclaim their stolen innovations. Emma was now working with federal authorities to develop new legal protections for entrepreneurs against sophisticated intellectual property theft schemes. Rachel Torres had won a Pulitzer Prize nomination for her investigative series exposing Crawford's network and the broader problem of intellectual property theft targeting international students and immigrant entrepreneurs. Her reporting had led to policy changes at major universities and new federal funding for legal assistance programs supporting victims of business fraud. I had returned to my morning routine of visiting Harold at Murphy's Corner Cafe, but now I brought homemade breakfast pastries and we discussed philosophy, business ethics, and his granddaughter's legal victories. Harold's warning had saved not just my career, but had ultimately led to justice for dozens of other victims who had been waiting years for someone with the resources and determination to fight back effectively. The experience had taught me that the most valuable relationships in life are built on authenticity and mutual support rather than business convenience or personal advantage. Harold, Emma, and Rachel had become genuine friends who cared about justice and helping others, completely different from the manipulative relationships Crawford had used to control his victims. I had also learned to trust my instincts about people and situations. When Harold warned me not to go to work that morning, something deep in my intuition recognized the truth in his concern. I had learned to value that inner wisdom and to pay attention when something feels wrong, even if I can't immediately explain why. Most importantly, I had discovered that fighting back against injustice requires not just individual courage, but community support and collaborative effort. Crawford's power had come from isolating his victims and making them feel powerless. Our victory had come from building alliances and working together to expose his criminal methods. TechVault Innovations was now thriving as an ethical technology company that prioritized innovation, fair business practices, and supporting other entrepreneurs. We had established a foundation to provide legal assistance for startup founders dealing with intellectual property theft, and we regularly spoke at universities about protecting innovations from fraudulent business partners. Jessica and I had rebuilt our friendship on a foundation of honesty about Crawford's manipulation and shared commitment to preventing other entrepreneurs from experiencing similar betrayals. Jessica now managed our foundation's victim assistance programs, using her experience with Crawford's tactics to help other victims recognize manipulation and fight back effectively. Last month, I received the American Intellectual Property Association's Innovation Award for breakthrough applications of artificial intelligence in medical research. Harold and Emma proudly attended the ceremony, and Harold whispered to me during the awards dinner, "My son would be so proud to see justice finally served, and your innovations helping people the way he always hoped his research would." The greatest lesson I learned was that sometimes our most devastating betrayals lead to our most important discoveries about our own strength and the value of authentic relationships. True success isn't measured by what we can take from others, but by what we can build with integrity and shared purpose. Crawford had tried to steal my life's work, but ultimately his criminal scheme had led me to find genuine friends, meaningful work, and the satisfaction of helping others achieve justice. His betrayal had been intended to destroy me, but it had actually revealed reservoirs of strength and determination I didn't know I possessed. Standing in that conference room 6 months after nearly losing everything, I realized that Harold's warning had saved more than just my patents or my company. It had saved my faith in the possibility that good people can work together to overcome corruption and build something meaningful for the future. Every morning when I wake up, I think about Harold's courage in speaking up to protect someone he barely knew, and I try to find ways to extend that same protective care to other people who might need support or guidance. Sometimes the most powerful acts of heroism come from ordinary people who choose to do the right thing when they see injustice happening. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, or if you've ever discovered that people were working against you behind your back, I want you to know that those experiences don't define your worth or limit your potential for future success. Sometimes the people who try to tear us down actually reveal our capacity for resilience and growth that we never knew existed. Have you ever had a moment when a stranger's warning or unexpected kindness completely changed the direction of your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments about times when someone looked out for you when you needed it most. Please share your experiences, and if this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal and building authentic success, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that justice is possible even when everything seems hopeless. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that no matter how sophisticated the schemes against you might be, there are always good people willing to stand up for what's right. May you always have the courage to trust your instincts, the wisdom to recognize authentic allies, and the determination to fight back when justice requires your voice.